Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Fun House alongside Mr. Fun himself, Martin Popoff.
Mr. Close in the camera because I did get my microphone working. So
You're
I'm
not having
talking
fun
through
today,
the
Martin, right?
yeah. This is the camera microphone here. So we're gonna muddle through. So apologies to everybody. I'll yell if I can, but I yell anyways, don't I?
So we're gonna trudge through this. Martin's gonna talk as clear and loud as he possibly can. I mean, I can hear him fine, but it's just it's obviously it's using the computer mic, which generally speaking is never the one you really want to use. So today for this episode, we're continuing on with our look at producers, and as we mentioned on the last episode, seeing as we just lost Roy Thomas Baker a few weeks ago, it seems perfect to talk about his productions today. So, a very notable guy who worked on a lot of really cool albums throughout the 70s and the 80s specifically. And Martin, we've talked about some of these producers didn't have a specific kind of style or sound. I would argue that maybe there is a Roy Thomas Baker sound for the most part, or at least maybe he chose to work with bands that had a certain sound that meshed very well with the way he liked to produce albums. So, and I guess we'll get into that as we're going along here. So, we've each picked out five albums. And before we get started, Martin, I don't know if you want to add anything about the great Roy Thomas Baker before we get started.
Yeah, so obviously he's most known for Queen and the Cars. He died April 12th, so just died recently, 2025, age 78. Began his career at Decca and worked as assistant engineer at Morgan. Encouraged by music producer Gus Dudgeon, moved to Trident, blah blah blah, on and on. I've heard a few things about him over the years where he was quite a prima donna. I think he drove a big fancy car, maybe even a Rolls Royce or something, right? And no expense was spared when they did their recordings. But yeah, it's funny. I agree with you. I think I learned somewhat that across some of these things there's a definite sound. And I tested a few albums that he produced just to see if they should go in the list, and I found some resounding no's. Albums that I thought did not sound very good. That will mention it. Well, here's one of them right here. So I went and played this, and I didn't like the drum sound on it and stuff. But it was good to reacquaint with this album. But I was surprised how 80s this kind of sounded. So yeah, there were a few like that along the way. So I learned a few things about him as we go along. But yeah, so I'll start in with my first three, I guess. And I don't have physicals for the first two. So first I went with Bebop Deluxe Futurama. And this is one of those where there we go, where we do learn that he can do some of the things he did for Queen elsewhere. Bebop Deluxe is a hard band to categorize, and but they do have Queen-like qualities, and I think you hear that on there. So I think the theme with him is that he can be he can work with a lot of challenging sounds and do a lot of layers and stuff and make them all to work. I think that's one thing I learned as we went along here. So yeah, good powerful bottom end on that. I don't think he got a good powerful bottom end as I was searching through the Queen albums on everything. But I think he gets a good bottom end on that, so that was good. My number nine, I went with Alice Cooper, Flush the Fashion. Um, and this is a so it's an 80s sound on here. It's a modern sound, but it is a very early into the 80s sounding albums kind of thing. But again, lots of sounds, there's acoustic drums, there's electronic drums. I always like this album. That's the other thing when we do these producer shows is that it helps if you're a fan of the album, I suppose, as well, for your pick. But yeah, I thought he brought Alice Cooper into the modern age somewhat on this, and he was, again, dealing with a lot of challenging sounds. There's a lot of challenging guitar sounds on here as well, so he's got to work with a lot of things. My number eight, I do have a physical for my Captain Lockheed and the Starfighters, Robert Calvert. That's signed by Arthur Brown. He's a guest on this, right? This is really cool. So the vinyl of this, you get this booklet in here, and then you get an extra page there. So this is a very again, I guess the theme is he can work with a lot of interesting, eccentric people and get a lot of cool sounds. And on this, It's very hawkwindy when it comes to the music, and he does get kind of a gritty, muffly, urgent, challenging sort of heavy muscular sound when they're doing the music. And then every second track, I don't know if it's the exact pattern throughout, but it's a lot of spoken word stuff. So this is almost like a soundtracky story sort of album. So that is my 10, 9, and 8.
Okay. So I just realized I goofed. I only picked five, but after I do my
Oh,
first three, I'm going to go and you start your next. I'm going to go run and grab because I have others that I would have picked, so it's not a big deal.
all
So
right.
we'll do some on the fly programming here today, but
Okay.
fine. All right. So I'm also going to pick Bebop Deluxe. This will be my first choice. You mentioned and you took the words right out of my mouth. I think there are certain qualities about this band that are very similar to Queen, which I think is why he works so well with these guys. It's this like mix of like glam and like prog rock and hard rock and pop all kind of blended together. And there's like a lushness and a lavishness about this album that is very similar to a couple of the Queen albums, I think. And I love the guitar tone he gets from Bill Nelson on this album. But at the same point in time, I think especially on a handful of tracks, um, Simon Fox and Charlie Tumahai's bass is very, very crystal clear in the mix. And I love when you hear the separation of all the instruments and whatnot. But man, some songs on here like Love with the Madman, totally grandiose. Stage Whispers just explodes with all sorts of vibrancy. Made in Heaven, it's got these lush acoustic guitars and then the heavy electric guitar. And then you got Sister Seagull, the beefy power chords, the shimmering acoustic guitar, and then those screaming leads and the Hendrixy guitar tone on Music in Dreamland. Just absolutely amazing album. I would probably say, I mean, these guys never had a bad album, but I think this is probably the best sounding Bebop Deluxe album, and it's probably not even close. And that's thanks, I think, to Roy Thomas Baker. Next choice is going to be Fountains of Light by Starcastle.
Yeah.
A band that obviously they get there you go. They get knocked a bit for being kind of like Yes clones, but I think that they do what they do really, really well. And interesting how I went and read a quote from Roy who said that this album was a complete disaster to work on, but it actually was a lot of fun, which doesn't make any sense. Was it fun? Was it not fun? But I think it sounds great. I love the production on this album. I think to me, he seems to work best with bands who have like I don't want to use the term art rock sensibility, but bands who are a little bit more artful in their songwriting and the way they want their albums to sound. And I think this is masterfully produced. I love the keyboard and synth sounds on this album. I love the fact that, again, the Yes comparisons. I think he was able to dial in on these qualities that Yes always had, where you hear the Rickenbacker bass high in the mix. You hear the guitar kind of, and I would argue that he gets better guitar tone out of these guys than Steve Howe, but whatever. I think the layers of vocals are amazingly well done. The lead and backing vocals, again, reminds me of that kind of Queen thing going on here. True to the Light is great. Dawning of the Day just sounds glorious. I think this is a winning formula to have him work with a band like this. And it's a shame he didn't do more like kind of prog albums throughout his career because I think that it's a really, really good mix. But love it. And next up, I'm going to go with Journey Infinity. So interestingly enough, the band brings in Roy to work with them on the first album with their brand new singer. And I hate to keep harping on it, but it just seems to be a trend with a lot of these bands that he worked on. And I think they call it the stacked vocal harmony approach. So here you've got this new guy, Steve Perry, and the existing guy in Greg Raleigh. And the way he produced these two guys with their vocals together, just I don't think any other Journey album really sounds like this from a vocal perspective. And it just makes Steve Perry sound like larger than life on his first album with this band. But the way the guitars are produced, the piano and the organ and the keyboards, the drums, everything is just so separated and so crystal clear in the mix. And there's just some absolutely epic sounding stuff here. You got the lights is bluesy but wonderful and warm, feeling that way, which segues right into any time. I don't know whose idea it was to do that, but it's like absolute genius. You got the hard rockers like La Do Da, you got the epic stuff like Wheel in the Sky, and then to me, Wheel in the Sky, Something to Hide, and Winds of March, Boom, Boom, Boom are three like the strongest Journey tracks in a row. And they're all just larger than life sounding. So good. In fact, I would have personally closed out the album with those three instead of Can Do and Open the Door and put those earlier in the album. But it's just this masterful blend of like hard rock and a little bit of prog and arena rock and just some artful stuff all mixed together. And I would argue that this band has plenty of great sounding albums, but I don't think any of them sound quite like this. And it's my favorite Journey album of all time. So yeah, that's my first three.
All right. Next, I went with Ian Hunter, Overnight Angels. I really do love the Ian Hunter solo canon better than Mott the Hoople. I love You're Never Alone with a Schizophrenic and Short Back and Sides and stuff. But this is earlier on. It's a little more grandiose, where we do get a little bit of the. It's almost Bruce Springsteen-esque, wide-angled, kind of Phil Spector-esque, I suppose. But the interesting thing about what Roy does with the band at this point is he makes it sort of exciting and glammy and trashy all at the same time, as well as kind of wide angle and Phil Spector esque. Um, Crunchy, bright snare and cymbal sounds on here. There's a lot of sounds he has to deal with. There's bass, piano, guitar. And all told, it's a little, oddly enough, this is recorded at Le Studio, and Nick Blagona is one of the assistant engineers on it. But oddly enough, it's a little Reinhold Mack like. And I noticed that from some of the other things that he did as well. And I'm feeling that a little bit with the drum sound on Fountains of Light as well. But yeah, it's got this bright, urgent, kind of mid-rangey, almost a little bit intrusive kind of mid-rangey sound on it, but still, again, the theme is rising to the challenge of having a lot of different instrumentation that he has to deal with on that. Okay, next I went with No Rest for the Wicked and Ozzy Osbourne. And, the idea here is a little bit, he's part of the big production job. He's not all of it, sort of thing. But I've never had a problem with the production on this. People often compare this a little bit to the Ultimate Sin and say it's kind of an 80s or a hair metal time or sound or whatever. I've never linked this album with the Ultimate Sin at all. I think it's got all the best characteristics of a fairly mechanized corporate 80s sound, but for some reason, whether it's the performances or having Zach in there's this kind of like good, steady, straight line. It feels locked to a grid sort of sound to it, but it's still very heavy. I love this album. I like this way more than I like the Ultimate Sin. And so, yeah, so I think you hear 80s characteristics on this album, but it still sounds really good. Next, I went with Foreigner Head Games. And so this one, here's where you get, this is a pretty similar sound to Double Vision. That's what it's called, right? Double Vision, yeah. And I think what you get out of this record is I have talked to the guys about this. Like, I wrote up one of those little Ye Old Metal essays, and where I have all those short documents over at Zunior, and I wrote up the story of the recording of Head Games, and the guys talk about how, yeah, it was definitely one of those no expenses spared. Everybody's drinking a lot, lining up the wine bottles along the wall, and all this kind of stuff, right? But what I like about the sound here is you do get an eccentric sound that builds on that Foreigner kind of less is more thing, where they're free is the least, and then Bad Company's a little more, and then Foreigner's a little more kind of thing. But it's still less is more kind of thing, where the heaviness comes out of the idea of, it feels often like you're just hearing guitar and drums kind of thing. So you've got this kind of mid-rangey vibe. But yeah, again, same kind of thing where it's urgent, a little bit trashy, a little bit glammy to the way he's kind of put things together there. So that's my 7, 6, and 5.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's my next one. I'll also, if you want to hold that back up, we'll go with that album as well from Foreigner. And yeah, I think that album is a little bit more kind of basic compared to the production on the first two records. But it is a little similar to the second album, but it's very guitar oriented, I think. And I mean, tracks like Dirty White Boy, Love on the Telephone, and Woman right off the bat, boom, 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 great stuff. Title track is amazing. Uh, I would argue he's also does a very good job if you look at a lot of the albums we're going to talk about today, where he gets some amazing performances and sounds from guitar players. Like if you look at like Neil, like I don't think Neil Sean was ever produced as well as Roy Thomas Baker. Brian May, obviously. I mean, he's got this way. Paul Kossoff, the guys from the Cars. He's got this way of really bringing them into the mix in such a great way to give them like a unique sound. And I always thought that Mick Jones had like the Mick Jones sound, and he really does have it on that album. So that's my next pick is Head Games. And next up, I'm going to go with Free Fire and Water, which apparently the band did a lot of the production themselves early on in the process. Then he came in and did some engineering and helped out with the kind of finalizing everything up. But this is a kind of like the Foreigner situation. This is very kind of basic rock and rolly. And it almost sounds to me when I listen to this album, it sounds like it's like was recorded live. I mean, like you're in the studio with the band. I mean, you can hear this. It's just basic bass, drums, vocals, and guitar. And there's like no effects on anything. This is like the anti-Queen thing with an album like this. Very basic. I mean, the title track, Mr. Big. I mean, all right now, just these crystal clear non-distorted guitar tones, Les Paul into a Marshall, the amazing vocals, just the way the bass and drums, it's just very, very cool, very live sounding, and I think just really appropriate for a band like this. Next up, I'm going to go with Hawkwind's Hall of the Mountain Grill. One thing, if you're a Hawkwind fan, Martin, I'm sure you could attest to this. You've written books on them. A lot of their albums are not greatly produced, right? They're oftentimes muddy and chaotic and all that kind of stuff. This is a gorgeous album. And I think he really brought out some of I'm going to go back to that word artful nature that was in this band. And there's really no other album that sounds like this. It's lush. Yeah, it's space rock, but it's a little more floaty and dreamy Hawkwind. Some of those elements, the heavy riff occasionally, the throbbing bass is here, but for the most part, this is like a completely different band. And just some classic tracks on, Wind of Change is so good. You Better Believe It is awesome. The title track is great. Psychedelic Warlords, amazing stuff. Maybe one of the classiest sounding Hawkwind albums, if that's possible, right? Not a band we ever associate with a term like that. But yeah, I absolutely love this album and I love his production on it. So that's my next three.
All right, very cool. Okay, next I'm going with Queen One, and we know this situation where this is kind of a thing where they had more or less unlimited recording time to put this together, and it really shows. It's a very elaborate recording, Trident, right? And Yeah, what I think he gets on here is again, he works with so many different elements. There's piano. He puts the vocals in here properly. I mean, that's a whole nother issue as well. It's almost like our esoteric guitar tone kind of thing, that the show that we're going to do with Hack in a while, right? But yeah, I've talked with a lot of people lately about this idea of part of being a producer is getting the frequencies not to fight with themselves. And yeah, even talking with my buddy Brian Slagle, about death metal, producing death metal, and how you sometimes have to put in like a pretty clacky Vinnie Paul-esque bass drum to not compete with bass, or the way guitars can be down tuned sometimes, and even vocals, a death vocal, right? So that's just an example, and I think he puts Freddie in here among all these competing frequencies really nicely, and right off the bat we are getting that really crunchy, interesting Brian May guitar sound out of here. And yeah, I think it's got a little bit of dirt to it, a little bit of grit to it. But it's got all the highs you want and all the lows you want. It's got a good bottom end. So yeah, good. Again, challenging job that he had to do on this, and I think he comes up with an absolute classic. I
Do you
usually
think
rate
Martin,
that.
like early on with this band and working with Roy, they early on they're always kind of like, we're not using any synthesizers on this album. These are where all these sound effects we're creating by other means. Do you think that allowed them to kind of like open up the floodgates to utilize anything in their power that was not that to be able to create such interesting noises and things and textures and stuff. Because that's
Yeah,
like a characteristic of all these early Queen albums.
yeah, and so yeah, I mean it's a really good point because as time goes on, they're using him for a long time, kind of thing. So he's almost like their George Martin as we're coming up. And yeah, it's the most famed thing he's known for, and it gets even more intense on my next choice, A Night at the Opera. Um, so yeah, this is the big hit album, and you've got all kinds of interesting effects and sounds and intros and outros and parts, like on, for example, Death on Two Legs. And the Prophet song is another epic on here. You've got the God Save the Queen. You've got the vaulted, many multi-tracked guitars and multi-tracked vocals. And then, of course, you've got the greatest song of all time by anybody, Bohemian Rhapsody, on here. And I always talk about that difference between objectivity and subjectivity. Well, again, we can take the song and talk about it that way, but we can even take the production of that song and talk about it that way. How many cool things there are in there, the bells and the opera section and everything, and how the piano's woven into it, and how heavy the heavy parts sound.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
that's another thing Roy gets for Queen, is this idea of we're not going to be heavy too often, but when we are heavy, we're going to sound heavier than any other band out there, right? You know, your Sheer Heart Attack. Well, let's say Modern Times Rock and Roll, Stone Cold Crazy, the heavy part of this song, the heavy parts of Prophet Song or Death on Two
Death on
Legs.
Two Legs, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, you've got them doing the challenging dance hall type music on here. You've got your lazing on a Sunday afternoon, your Good Company, right? You've got folk on here, and he just commandeers them through this whole thing. Executive engineer. That's interesting. Executive engineer Mike Stone. I've never heard that before. It's produced by Roy Thomas Baker and Queen, so we often see the producer sharing credit with the band. But then right under it in the same size text, executive engineer Mike Stone, and Mike's passed on, right, as well. He died quite a while ago. That usually just says engineer, but and all titles composed, arranged, and performed exclusively by Queen. So there you go. That's my next choice. I'll finish it off here. We go with the Cars. And again, on this, what I like about this album is it is quite a bit heavier and more analog sounding and more just bold and muscular sounding than future Cars albums. I mean, I did take out this. I had it kind of in my honorable mentions situation, Candio, but yeah, I think what he brings to this is that bright, overdriven drum sound that as I said earlier, you possibly might associate a little bit with Mac, um, but or John Bonham or Jimmy Page as a producer. But I think you've got that on this where the drums just almost sound like they're a little electrocuted and surging into the mix a little bit. So that's good. But it is not a particularly it's not a synth pop sort of album. They get a lot synth poppier over time. This is still pretty guitar-y and heavy. And I think one of the reasons this album was such a big hit is because of what Roy did for them and helped them to get this sound. So he's bringing a few elements from Queen into a straight early days new wave band, which is kind of cool in itself. And then my final one is my favorite Queen album, Jazz. This, I've often said, has my favorite drum sound of all time, second only to Abacab. I think what he does for Roger Taylor is unbelievable on here with the toms, and again the surgingness of the drums. This has less bottom end than the first Queen album, and probably less than most of them. I mean, it's got more than News of the World. I'd say it has less than. It has about the same, which is a fairly low level as Sheer Heart Attack and Queen 2, I suppose. But that's not a problem with it. I think it kind of it matches the fact that there's just all these short, interesting, zesty, new wavy, pop fruity kind of strange songs all over the album. And again, when they do any heavy stuff on here, it's there's a little bit of that how I talk about sometimes about bands playing in a matchbox, right? I think you get that out of Let Me Entertain You, and what was the other pretty heavy one on here? Dead on Time, right? Um, so you get that kind of furtive, obsessive, hand washing, kind of production out of those two songs. Yet you get a song like Fat Bottom Girls, and they do something completely different. So the cool thing about what you get on this album is they will try different sounds for different songs. So that sounds really fat and majestic, whereas Dead on Time is like written to be a heavier song, but it's played more in this kind of like obsessive mid-rangey sort of place. And then you've got a lot of challenges on here with the with the sampling of the different songs on more of that jazz. And you've got just beautiful, interesting drum arrangements on things like "Don't Stop Me Now" or drum tones, textures, and then yeah, more challenges all over the place. Fun It, kind of the disco song. Bicycle Race, we got all the bells and stuff in there. Mustafa is a challenging song. So, and credit, I guess, the Queen guys probably have the same sort of temperament as Roy Thomas Baker, like expensive tastes, right? And no expense spared. We'll do whatever we want. Experiment. Whether it's a really expensive experiment and we don't even use it, fine, we do that. We're making art here, kind of thing. And I have heard that about him. That's one of the positive things people say about him. But yeah, he definitely was this. He was a flamboyant producer, put it that way. So there you go. Those are my final ones.
Cool. Great choice. More on that in a second.
Yeah.
First, let's throw the first Queen album in here as well. Yeah, I mean, I literally could pick any of these Queen albums that he worked on with them, and I think they're all really good productions. I like the fact that like even with the debut, this sounds like they spent millions of dollars on this because even though this arguably, maybe this and the second album have the most raw sounding Queen production, it's still very polished and very much utilizing all sorts of studio trickery. And, again, I hate to keep harping on it, but man, he was able to give Brian May one of the most unique guitar sounds ever. I mean, he's one of those guys, Martin. I think you hear a Brian May play a couple notes or hit a chord, it's Brian May instantly.
Yeah.
And especially on these albums, it's like there's nobody that sounds like him. And I think Roy had a lot to do with that. But yeah, there's just great songs on there. There's heavy stuff on here. There's, again, what he was able to do with Queen is help them to have all these different facets to their music. So like, you listen to something like this, or you listen to any of these Queen albums, and you're kind of like, okay, how do you describe the music of Queen? Well, how much time you got, right? Let's talk about it. It's not something you could just say, they're this, they're that. And I think it's because of how they were able to differentiate every little aspect of what they wanted to do in the studio. And I think you have to have Roy Thomas Baker in there with them to do that. So yeah, so that's next up for me. And then I'm also gonna echo jazz, classic, probably to me their most underrated gem in the 70s catalog, I think. Most of the other albums get talked about more than this one, and I've always had a soft spot for this. You mentioned all the variety on here. Yeah, there's certainly challenging stuff on here. There's heavy stuff on here. There's anthemic stuff on here, and all four guys just sound amazing on here. It's just really, really well produced. So, of course, I will going to include that, and I have to include the Cars. This is, I think, a kind of a different album to anything else on my list, but I think that Roy's way of working magic with bands who had that kind of artisticness to what they wanted to do, I think really worked well with these guys because, here you have this band that's like, call them new wave, power pop, right? There's a lot of anthems on here. I mean, there's a reason, you mentioned it when you first started talking about that this album was so big. You had these great songs, they're excellent songs, and this great production. And what, 75% of this album were radio hits, pretty much, something like that. It's a marriage made in heaven. I think that Greg Hawkes's keyboards are present, but they don't overpower things. It's still very much a guitar record. I think Elliot and Rick's guitars sound amazing on this album, just so crisp and clear. And again, I think one of Roy's strengths is working with vocals and doing the vocal layering. And I think that Ben and Rick's vocals are just expertly done. woven together, stacked on top of each other when each of them are taking leads. They just sound so powerful. I mean, so many great songs in here. Just What I Need in My Best Friend's Girl. Moving in Stereo is great. I mean, my personal favorite is All Mixed Up. It's just absolutely lovely. I love the use of kind of like the keys and the strings, and then the sax comes in. So good. One of his best, but I still think my favorite production from him is Night at the Opera. For all the reasons that we've already talked about, I think this was just so groundbreaking at the time. And I think when most people talk about those great, influential, groundbreaking productions in the 70s or in this era, I think you have to look at this one. And this helped save the career of this band in a big way. And even if you just talk about Bohemian Rhapsody, right? How amazing that is, but there's so much other stuff on here that no matter what they did in the studio, they turned all of these very different songs into winners. And I think the fact that there is so much variety out here, I think is testament to how great the songwriting is and how great the production is. So yeah, just amazing stuff. A Night at the Opera. Queen is well
Sweet.
represented here, right? As
Yeah.
they should be.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. We ended up with actually all four of the same ones at the top, right?
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to throw this in because I think Sheer Heart Attack is great, and I think Queen 2 is really good as well. And I also had Candio as a honorable mention
Yeah.
as well. I mean, there's so many good ones. So
Yeah.
many.
Yeah, I thought about Yes, Heaven and Earth, but we know there's problems with that. There's the Darkness album, One Way Ticket to Hell and Back, which is a really good production as well. And yeah, and I went and played the Hawkwind, and that absolutely is like you say, one of the better sounding albums. Dangerous Toys, Hellacious Acres. Um, I didn't like the Ron Wood, and there's a Stranglers album 10, which is widely considered one of their least good albums, and it's a very modern 80s dancey kind of loud brain sort of sound. And then I guess he worked with a bunch of other guys, right? Who else we got?
I mean, he did the Smashing Pumpkin album, Smashing Pumpkins
Yes,
album, Zeitgeist.
Santana, Nazareth, Gasoline, Jet, the old Jet band, T
Yep.
Rex. It's definitely a funny sort of catalog. I thought there was more, and but I loved learning the most out of all this is hearing those little innovations that he got with Queen being used elsewhere, kind of thing. So
Yep.
that was kind of cool. And
Yep.
again, that tying together of Bebop Deluxe with Queen, that because they're such a hard band to compare to anybody, it's interesting, that there is that connection there, and then you start to actually think of them as more similar to each other when you just think about the production alone, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
cool.
funny you mentioned earlier the Yes album, Heaven and Earth. I always thought that that's a pretty good sounding album. The problem is the songs are not good.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I know. Yeah, it is a good sounding album for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a shame that, wasn't he supposed to work with Yes in the 70s on an album? I always thought that maybe he was early on supposed to work with them on Tormato after Eddie Offord left that production, but then he that wound up not sticking. I don't know. For whatever reason, I always thought that he was tied to Yes at some point in the 70s, but it actually didn't happen. Because I always think he would have been done a really good job working with him based on what he did with Starcastle, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
um,
Interesting. Cool.
yeah.
Nice.
All right, Martin. What's going on with contrarians and books and podcasts? And you are always the busy man. And what's happening over there?
Yeah, a lot of contrarian stuff gone up recently. A few more of these provocative new wave of British heavy metal shows that I'm getting a lot of complaints about. From the new wave of British heavy metal
Complaints are
Facebook.
sometimes good, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's funny. I like arguing, so I'm fine with that. I have a thick skin on or when it comes to these comments. So a lot of those have been going on, and yeah, the podcast's still going. I think I had one offshoot band, Shadow Band or whatever. But yeah, every week there's a new podcast episode, and the books are all at martinpopoff.com. Bit of a problem right now with the whole Iron Maiden book because it's made in China. That is subject to the tariffs. So I'm having kind of a big issue right now and just watching the news every day to see if that deal gets done and we end up fixing that situation. But yeah, there's this whole thing about de minimis still applies all over the place. That's a thing where mail order people, anything under $800, these packages are fine. But it quietly doesn't apply or got removed when it came to China, and that's caused a lot of problems. So
So complicated, right?
yeah, yeah,
Nothing's easy.
yeah. But yeah, lot of books available. The Guns N' Roses book is coming soon again, and that also is printed in China. But yeah, martinpopoff.com for all that stuff.
Cool. Hopefully we helped you move some sweet books last week or whatever that was.
Yeah, very cool. I know, and I love the Alex Lifeson. That was amazing. That was so cool.
Yeah, that was a great
That
interview.
happened.
That was
Yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
he was a good partner for that 45 minutes. That was a great discussion and such an
yeah,
easy guy to talk to. I mean, you've talked
yeah,
to him before, so you know.
yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Oh, you did great. That was awesome. Very cool.
Yeah. All right. So there you have it, everybody. Our favorite productions from Roy Thomas Baker. Let us know what yours are down in the comments below. And Martin and I will be back in 2 weeks with, I guess we're going to do another one, Martin. We haven't decided. I don't know if you have any ideas. We'll talk off camera, I guess. But
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
And we'll bring you another one because folks seem to be liking these. And it's always kind of cool to think about some of these albums in a little bit different way, right? And I think that's what this little series has forced us to do. So tune in. What do we got coming up here? The Professor's Picks in a couple hours. Ken Golden and myself looking at new album releases that are happening today here on this 9th. Yeah, the 9th of I have to think about that a second. The 9th of May. Tomorrow we got Jamie Laszlo and the review crew, and Sunday we got two ranking the albums episodes for you. One on Badlands and the other on Queens of the Stone Age. So that's happening on Sunday. So till then, this is on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube all together all the damn time. Please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as a post. And please do hit the like button before you leave. Please go check out martinpopoff.com and buy yourself some books. We got, hey, Mother's Day is coming up, so buy your favorite mother a wonderful book on Angel or whatever, hey,
Queen.
yeah, Queen, there you
Yeah.
go. Queen or the Sweet Book is great for ladies will love the Sweet Book, so go ahead and do that. Martin may not get it to you in time, but you'll get it shortly there afterwards. So thanks for watching, everybody. From Martin Popoff, I'm Pete Pardo. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you 2 weeks back here at the Funhouse. Take care. Bye-bye.